We go live, we get a message that we are being live streamed. And
got it.
You got it before I did. Here we go. And as soon as we're on, I will mute us. And we will begin. Here we go.
Acknowledging some of the activists that I recognize here,
right.
Besides Jeff and Leila.
We are ready to get this party started, if you will. Welcome, everybody. My name is Dean Stevens. I am called, what am I called? The interim administrator and chief bottle washer and guitar player at Community Church of Boston. And we welcome you to this space. 14 more people just entered the waiting room and I need to let them in. I think I just did. I hope so. Yes. And it's so good to see so many of you. I want to tell you that Community Church of Boston is a place that we call a peace and justice congregation since 1920. And we have a speaker every Sunday on a different topic. And we are just so honored to bring up the topic of Palestine on this noontime broadcast. And we are glad that you have joined us, even though it's noontime. We make a nod to Jeff. If we would have had it at 7 p.m., it would have been like 3 weeks ago when we hosted Mazen Kumsia from the Palestine Museum of Natural History. And it was 7 p.m. and he joined us at 2 in the morning. Now that's sacrifice, and he gave us a beautiful presentation, which you can find on our YouTube channel as you can this same program we are having now. I want to tell you that Community Church's auditorium.
Dean, we lost your audio.
Took advantage to be loaded. Have you got it now, Skip?
Yeah.
With books from the estate of one of our members. His name was Bob Datilio. Among the things we found when we cleared it out were these. And you all know what symbolism this has. I'm going to be carrying these in my pocket. This is an old house that we cleared, and holding them and the Palestinian people in my heart. And I want to say that as a way to introduce this song that is written by one of our community church musical participants named Eliza Gilkison. Once I had a home, I still have the key. I take it everywhere I go to prove that all I've said is so, and all the world can see. The walls were painted blue, front door carved by hand, and generations of my kin and strangers all were welcomed in. And when they walked upon my land, pray for us all and name us the fallen, faces forgotten. Once I had a home. Olive trees once grew where mounds of rubble stand. A man can feel himself a king when water flows from well and spring, and peaceful is the land. Pray for us all and name us the fallen, faces forgotten. Once I had a home. The stars shine down on bone and skin, on wire and walls that hold us in, on roads that can't lead home again. Pray for us all and name us the fallen, faces forgotten. All the world watching, pray for us all the world watching. And all of you are watching as I introduce Skip Shield, who's going to act as our moderator and convener. Skip is coming to us from one of our co-sponsors on this event, that is the Friends Meeting House in Cambridge. Skip is also a marvelous photographer and activist on the area of Palestine and other things as well. You can see some of his photographs behind him. Skip, it's all yours. Take it away.
Yes, I would like to acknowledge some of the activists that I see here that primarily work with Israel-Palestine. Anita Rapone, Anne Remley, who I'm very close to, we've worked for 20 years, author with her husband of the famous math cards showing the shriveling of Palestinian territory. I'm sure I'm going to miss some people, but I think it's important to do this. And my sister and brother-in-law, Elaine and Bob Schroeder in Juneau, Alaska, who do a great deal of work on climate justice. Do I echo? Do you hear an echo in my? No? Okay,
Yes,
I'm hearing it.
yes, you do, but let's just live with it for now, and we'll
Okay.
work on it.
Ian Harrington of Friends Meeting at Cambridge. Jill Charney of JVP Boston, that's Jewish Voice for Peace. John Bach on many issues. JVP Boston generally, one of our co-sponsors. Ken Barney. Oh, the list is so long. Leslie Manning. I think I'll stop there because I'm so pleased to see so many people and to be able to acknowledge that we are together as many of us as activists on Palestine, Israel. A second acknowledgement, which I think is very important, especially related to what we're going to be talking about, one state and its subtopic of indigeneity, if I pronounce that correctly. And I'm sure Leila will talk more about that, or Jeff. This comes from Sarah Driscoll, and it's long, but it's beautiful. It's really the best written of the various land acknowledgements I've seen. And Sarah is from the Alliance for Water Justice in Palestine, another one of our co-sponsors. Just as the Palestinians are indigenous to their homeland, we want to acknowledge the original and righteous residents of the land those of us in Massachusetts are standing on for this gathering. We thank them for their hospitality. This land we are on is land of the Massachusetts people, which stands for At the Great Hill, referring to the gorgeous Blue Hills just south of Boston. While great efforts have been made to exterminate the Massachusetts, Nipmuc, Wampanoag, Nauset, Pocumtuck, and Pequot Mohegan peoples, all from what is now known as Massachusetts, they are still very much among us and guiding us in how to care for each other in the land. We encourage everyone to learn more about these tribes and others in the U.S. by reading Native authors' books, such as the one by Roxanne Ortiz, An Indigenous People's History of the United States, or authors like Louis Erdrich and Robin Wall Kimmer, Braiding Sweetgrass. There's so much to understand about Native people, culture, and history. And we strongly urge those of us in Massachusetts to check out the Indigenous legislative agenda currently being pondered in our State House about various Indigenous rights. Introductions. One note of timing. Because of various time constraints, Leila has to leave at 1 o'clock. Correct, Leila? We had scheduled this for 2 o'clock, and so we'll just adjust to that. Jeff, are you still okay with 2 o'clock? Because it might give us an opportunity for informal chat with some of the people on the call. Introductions. Leila Farsakh is Palestinian, born in Jordan. She's a political economist, associate professor and chair of political science department at University of Massachusetts, Boston. Author of numerous books, including the recently published one she edited and has several articles in, Rethinking Palestine Statehood. And she'll say more about this concept of statehood and how difficult it can be to work with that. She visited the Friends Meeting at Cambridge in 2009. I hope you remember that, Leila. And you were our first speaker at our meeting, our Quaker meeting, on this particular issue. In particular, her article stresses the the history of the one state proposal, going all the way back to the mandate period. I didn't understand that. I thank you for that. And then through 1946 and a paper that Martin Buber, the theologian, and others wrote. I had no idea about that long history. Jeff Halper is a Jewish Israeli born in Boston, but he grew up in Minnesota. Yes. And he's an anthropologist, an activist, co-founder and co-director of the Israeli Committee Against Home Demolitions and the One Democratic State campaign. Like Leila, Jeff is an author of numerous books, including the recently published Decolonizing Israel, Liberating Palestine, as well as the book he published right before that really impressed me, as much as his more recent one, War Against the People, Israel, the Palestinians, and Global Pacification, about Israel's high-tech surveillance industry. If you remember the word Pegasus, that system that is now very controversial, Israel has a lot to do with that. He leads tours with gorgeous maps, and he is probably the first Israeli I met during my first visit to Israel, Palestine in 2003. Dean's already spoken about himself. I have the photographs behind me. This is from my current photographic projects called The Ongoing and Relentless Nakba. And I'm pretty sure most of you recognize the word Nakba, catastrophe, 1948. I'd like to reference, before we launch, the recently published Amnesty International report that claimed Israel is engaging in apartheid, not only in, say, Gaza and the West Bank, which is pretty obvious, but also Israel itself. And it refers to the Overton window, which Leila might want to say something more about, or Jeff, giving openings for politicians who are sitting in the middle on the fence to be more critical of Israel. So the theme of the moment is strategies and actions toward a just peace in Palestine, Israel. And we frame this, thanks to Nancy Murray suggesting this, as a conversation between Leila and Jeff. But first, and I'm going to have to adjust timing here, I'd like to call on Leila for about 10 minutes to outline your work, and then we'll follow that with Jeff for another 10, and then I encourage the two of you to converse, and I've already sent you some questions that might help this, because you are working in similar arenas. So Leila first.
Well, thank you very much for this invitation.
Oh, you muted yourself.
I was saying thank you very much for organizing this, and thank you for all those who are attending. I'm really impressed at what a large number there is at 12 o'clock, so thank you all for being there. Yes, I think Skip gave us a very rich agenda, a very ambitious question, which is what is the strategy to have a just peace in Palestine and Israel. And I think in the 10 minutes that I will have, and maybe a bit less, I will focus really on two things. I think in any attempts for us to try and think of what would be the strategy to reach peace in Palestine and Israel, I think we need to focus on two main themes, and I think about three main actors. And the two main themes I would focus on is one, the question of the narrative. How do we describe this problem? I mean, as you said, Skip, you mentioned that the Amnesty report is a very important report. We had before it the Beit Salem report, all of which show that there is a clear demarcation and going away from the two-state solution, and showing that we are dealing with a one-state reality, an apartheid reality, where Israel is the only sovereign, controlling Palestinians in three main areas, the West Bank, Gaza, and inside 48, with a regime, a legal regime that is differentiated, but in the end is based on segregation, the way the apartheid system was also based on segregation. So I think this is the very first step.
How did that happen?
Sorry?
Is Charlie on this, Dean?
No, he was. I can't find him now. But
Okay.
What?
Can you manage that? Hey,
Yes.
Pamit,
We're hearing you, Skip.
go ahead, Leila.
Yeah.
She did it.
Okay, are you hearing me? Yes. So I'm saying defining the problem is the first step to resolving the problem. That this problem is not just about, land. This problem, this Israeli-Palestinian conflict, is about justice and about equality. And I think framing and emphasizing that we are living in an apartheid reality that can only be overcome through a just solution is something very important. So framing it is very important. The second issue, apart from saying that it's an apartheid reality, is that it's the aim of the way to resolve, the strategy that resolves this conflict or ends apartheid is a strategy that is based on justice and equality. Which means that it's a strategy that calls for everybody who lives on this land to have equal political rights, and everybody who wants to live in this land, Palestinian refugees have a right to return. Jews who want to escape persecution have a right to live there in equality with whoever lives on the land. I think this is something very important. So right of return is central, but right to equality to immigrants and citizens is something very important along a constitution. Now, how do we get there? I think the core issue is working on three main actors. The Palestinian-Israeli conflict had always had three actors. It has the Israelis, the Zionists, the Palestinians, and the international community. And to achieve a just one-state solution, one which gives equal right to everybody who is living on the land, who guarantees the right of return, and is based on international law, I think it is very central to be able to have to work on the Palestinian population, on the Israeli population, and on the international community. I will not speak on what are the tasks on the Israeli side. I will let this for Jeff. But on the Palestinian level, there's a number of things that need to happen. First, the first thing is that Palestinians need to go away from the two-state solution. So the Palestinian leadership cannot continue with the two-state model and the negotiation model when we live now in an apartheid reality. I think that's something very important. This is going to be a challenge because the Palestinian Authority is financed and supported by Israel. It does provide some security for the people who live on the West Bank, but it is an authority that doesn't have legitimacy. So I think the big challenge for the Palestinians would be how to define a new strategy that is not limited within the two-state solution and actually reclaims the one-state solution that the PLO has always proposed, which was proposed in 1971. And it's very important to reestablish Palestinian unity. And thirdly, more importantly, is to create democratic institutions that allows this new generation of Palestinians to take the reign of the struggle. And I think we saw this, the importance of unity in what is called the Unity Intifada that happened in April this year, that shows that the Palestinians inside 48 in Gaza and Jerusalem and the West Bank are all unified in one struggle, which is the struggle for justice. So the question is how to translate that into a political program. On the international level, I think there's also a very important role to play to achieve justice and peace in Palestine. And I think the strategy with the international community is one of two elements. The first one is to continue the BDS campaign. I think this is something very important because that's the campaign that keeps the Palestinian question alive, emphasizes that it's a question of rights, of equal rights, that it is based on international law. So that's something very important. But also there needs to be a strategy in which we can use international law more to our advantage. And what I mean by that international law needs, I know the Palestinian question and the Israel-Palestine question has been resolved, has been educated internationally as the only solution to it is a two-state solution. But this was not always the international consensus on how you solve the problem of Palestine. And I think working on international arena through various institutions or through various countries to emphasize that this apartheid regime is wrong and the only way to solve it is not to establish a two-state solution, but actually to democratize Israel and to decolonize Israel. So international pressure both at the grassroots level and international pressure also at the government level. I think I'll stop now and I'll let Jeff speak. This way we can maybe we'll have more of a conversation. I hope that's enough.
Thanks, Leila.
Pick it up from there. Okay. Well, thank you for inviting me. Boston is almost my family, and I know a lot of you. And thanks to Leila for agreeing to this conversation, which I think, it's something we should be having even more. in my view at least, from reading what Leila's written and having other conversations with her as well, we're really on the same page. I think our analysis is very similar. And as a matter of fact, I use her quite a bit in my book, her works in Decolonizing Israel, Liberating Palestine. So I think, Leila and this is part of her book in Rethinking Statehood. Leila and, as she said, a new generation of Palestinians, certainly, with some important voices, I think, from the older generations, have really done very important work in the last numbers of years in terms of rethinking not only statehood, of course. The two-state solution, which obviously is gone and actually never was, because you could never have a settler colonial movement would never allow a Palestinian state at all. So even the idea that there ever was a two-state solution is something that shows that we really don't understand what settler colonialism means. But not only rethinking statehood, but really rethinking what liberation means. Rethinking, if we're in a settler, I suppose for the indigenous people, the ideal resolution of a settler colonial situation is that the settlers get up and leave. Like in Algeria, for example, Kenya, and there's other examples. But in fact, as you well know, in the United States, if the settlers get to a certain critical mass or beyond, like in your world, they're not going to leave. And you have a situation in the United States where the indigenous populations have really been reduced to very small marginal groups, what we tend to call fourth world peoples, so that they really don't have national aspirations. I don't think the Massachusetts Native Americans have any illusion that somehow they're going to liberate Massachusetts. And so, in other words, what the fourth world peoples are doing are trying to carve out a certain cultural space for themselves within a large, massive settler colonial state that they have no chance and no aspiration of overthrowing. The Palestinian situation is somewhere in the middle of that. And that is that like South Africa, you have a settler population here, a settler colonial enterprise here, that's really succeeded in many ways. In other words, a settler community, which are the Israeli Jews, are so strong, so embedded, institutionally and economically, and certainly militarily and politically, in a state system that I think you have to argue in a way that the Palestinians have to bite that bullet, that they're not going to get Palestine, historic Palestine, back without settlers. So that's kind of a basic reality that they have to deal with. On the other hand, Palestinians are not a fourth world people. They're not the Massachusetts Native Americans. They're demographically significant population. Palestinians today, without the refugees returning, are already a majority in this country between the river and the sea. And they do have national aspirations. Now they're facing a tremendous disproportionality of power, of course, vis-a-vis Israel. But very much like the Black Africans in South Africa, they have not given up, and they shouldn't give up, their national aspirations. So we're in a situation where this is a type of settler colonialism in which the settlers are going to stay, and the indigenous population is going to have to deal with that. But at the same time, and this is crucial, the settlers have not won. As we saw, the settlers have not managed, with all Israel's military strength and international support and everything else, Israel has not managed to quash the Palestinian resistance in any way. Certainly, I would say today, I'm not speaking as a Palestinian, but in many ways today, I think, if you can compare today to 60, 70, 80 years ago, the Palestinian national movement is much stronger. And even if you look at Gaza, as much as Gaza has suffered, Israel has not managed to quell resistance. And even in little Gaza, that's like shooting fish in a barrel, in a sense. So the Palestinians do have power. And I think that's kind of my central message, is that you know, I think Leila and others have done very important work in terms of rethinking what liberation means, how the Palestinians could deal with a permanent settler presence. In other words, if there's going to be one state, would it be a binational state? Would it be a unitary state, simply a democracy for everyone? In other words, there's been a lot of thought put into that. What would a constitution look like? What would the civil society look like? And so on. And all that's really the foundations of moving forward. I think now, however, we're in a situation where we have to begin to move beyond that. You know, unfortunately, the way the world works, we're not in control of the historical processes. You know, we have to really respond. And I think the time that's been put into thinking this through has been very well spent. But now we're at a stage where we have to start translating that thinking through, that intellectual exercise that's been very important, into some kind of a political program. Because you can't be in a political struggle without a political program. And if we're in a position today where people know, I mean, even Biden knows that the two-state solution is gone. People know that there's an apartheid situation here. You know, Amnesty, Human Rights Watch, B'Tselem, as Leila says, has made that very clear.
I have, and you can give it a try.
I'm sorry, you're interrupting.
In conversation.
So you know that much we know. So then the question becomes, okay, if people know that, and people are, in a sense, know that the two-state solution is gone, know that we have to move on to something else, in a way, I think our supporters, like many of you, are waiting with bated breath to say, well, okay, so what is the answer? What is the program? Where should we be going? And that we're not really, that kind of leadership, we, and when I say we, it's a little bit maybe arrogant of me, but if this is an anti-colonial struggle, this is not simply a Palestinian struggle. It's a Palestinian-led struggle, of course. But I think in an anti-colonial struggle, you have to take all the anti-colonial forces together as comrades. And that would include critical Israelis. I mean, one of the people that contributed to Leila's book was Ilan Pappé, for example. So that it doesn't break down between us and them, Palestinians with their struggle and Israelis with their struggle, and how can we work together? No, we have to see ourselves as comrades, thinking together, acting together, you know, and planning together to give leadership to all of you, because you're not going to liberate Palestine from Boston. So that is really, so, and the fact that we're not exploiting this moment, that there's an opening here. People are waiting, even politicians, I would say, are waiting to say, okay, how do we move forward? What goes beyond the two-state? What goes beyond apartheid? And we have, and that's the thing, we have our fingers on the answers to that. A lot of the work that's been done, Leila's book is rich with all kinds of work that's been done on international law and constitutionality and concepts of civil society. And we have the information. We haven't yet put it together into a program that we can then take to people like you and say, this is the program, or this is a program. It's not the program. But this is, in other words, the Palestinian voice, I think, has to be much more prominent. And then from there, we have to begin to think together. And it's interesting, I have exactly the same idea that Leila just mentioned, and that is what I call the tripartite alliance. I write about this in my book, that the Palestinians it can be an alliance with critical Israelis, like myself, like Ilan Pappé. I mean, there is a community of critical Israelis who can play a very important role, but with you, with the international grassroots, you're crucial to this. You're their main ally, the Palestinians' main ally, and you have much more power than you're aware of, as we saw in the anti-apartheid struggle, if you're focused, if you're directed, if you're mobilized behind a political program. So those are sort of the three steps. And just in another minute, I want to say that there is the beginning of a program that started to emerge. I write about this in my book. I'm part of a Palestinian-led group called the One Democratic State Campaign. and Leila's in contact with us as well. And one significant thing I believe that we have done, we haven't yet, it's still in its infancy, it still really has to even lay some of the grassroots, especially among Palestinians, to organize. But a very significant achievement, I think, that we've made is over a couple of years of Palestinians and Israelis sitting together. And I don't mean, the Oslo Palestinians and Israelis, but really radical Palestinians and Israelis sitting together. We've come up with a 10-point program that you can see on our website. That's the onedemocraticstate.org website. And just in a word, because Leila and I'll talk about it more, what it really says is we have to begin, in terms of reimagining the state and reimagining a post-colonial reality, we have to begin to think in terms of civil society, civil identities. The national identities are there. There's a binational reality here, of course, but I won't get into it right now, but really because of the aggressive ethno-nationalism of Zionism, I don't believe a binational state could work at all. And as in fact, I don't think a binational state decolonizes. We'll talk about that later. So what that means is to create, and Mahmoud Mamdani, who's a very well-known professor of African studies at Columbia, now he's in his native Uganda. He's written just a book now called Neither Native Nor Settler, or Neither Settler Nor Native, in one of those orders. And he talks about a political community. And what he's saying is, in liberation, and this is what was done in South Africa, basically. In liberation, liberation has to be seen as the political independence of the civil collective, not the independence of a particular national group. Certainly not in our situation, because one national group isn't going to beat or suppress the other national group. So we have to redefine terms and think of ourselves as a new political community, which I think would make a lot of sense in the post-colonial reality in the young generation. As we're living together and working together, I think that's a process that'll happen. So in other words, after decolonization, you have a concept of a new political system with a constitution and the structures that are appropriate for a democratic state. You have a new civil society. You allow people to have their national expressions, because we're not going to, but a national expression does not have to be expressed in terms of a state. There's a lot of other ways national identities can be expressed in meaningful ways. But then to move to a higher level, and that is a kind of a transcendent political community of a new us. And let me just end on this, if I can. I hope maybe I'm talking too much, but let me just end on this. This is an example of what I mean by a new us. You just had the Super Bowl, which is a big deal. Well, the World Cup in football, world football, that you call soccer, is 1,000 times bigger than the Super Bowl. I mean, this is a major international event. And Israel, the Palestinian national football team has a higher international ranking than the Israeli national football team. But neither have succeeded in getting into the World Cup. What happens in this new post-colonial reality when we now have a football team of our players, Palestinians, Israeli Jews, maybe there'll be some African asylum seekers, some descendants of that community, maybe some Russians, there'll be some Armenians, some Bedouins, some Circassians. We have a fairly diverse society here. And we have a football team that actually gets into the World Cup. You can't imagine how that would galvanize that civil society. It would completely transcend Israeli Jews, Palestinian Arabs, all those dichotomies, and there'd be a new us. Our team is competing in the World Cup. That's just a little example, but I think a meaningful one, of how a new civil identity could begin to emerge. And that is really, I think, the answer to settler colonialism. And I know Leila has written about that as well. So
I
these
think
are ideas that we have to take forward in the real political arena.
Okay, so to answer you, and I first of all, I agree with you. Binationalism is not really an option, and I'm full of support of the one state, one democratic state campaign. I think they're doing a great job. It's very important. The challenge is that I think we are all, and I think all those who are also attending this webinar and many, many more people, there is a general, more or less, the grassroots or the civil society consensus, if we look at it, is in support of a one-state solution. We are beyond that. We made the case, everybody. The question is, how do we get there? And in the question of how do we get there, there are political imperatives, and there is some organizational imperatives. Okay, so on the organizational imperative, what the One State campaign is doing is excellent work. And it's excellent work. Why? Because it is Palestinian citizens of Israel working with Israeli citizens who are very able to exactly articulate that what's important to do is that the state has civic responsibility towards the people, right? So us Palestinians going that what we need is a state. The PA is not a state. The state that we now is recognized by 138 countries worldwide is not giving us democracy, nor is it representing us, nor is it uniting Gaza with West Bank, nor is it providing anything for the refugees. So what needs to happen is that the nation state is over. The nation state is an anachronism, as we said. The role of the state is to protect and honor the dignity of all the citizens. And as you said, we are in a reality now between the river and the sea. Right now, the only sovereign is Israel. This sovereign is colonial, settled colonial, and it is in control of 6 million Jews, and 6 million Palestinians. That's the facts, okay? Well, how are you gonna run this? That's the core question. So I think we don't have problem on the organizational level of civil society. The problem where we're stuck, or the strategy that we need to articulate in order to make this one state, one democratic state campaign into a political platform, we need to get the political actors, okay? And the political actors right now are the Palestinian Authority on the Palestinian side, right? It's the Palestinian Authority, which is the representative of some Palestinian people. But it is not a legitimate authority, but it is in control. How will the Palestinians get rid of this authority or deal with this authority? Or will the Palestinian convince the Palestinian Authority to say, you know, guys, we tried to see a solution, it did not work. Now we're gonna unify with Gaza. We're waiting for Mahmoud Abbas to die. We're gonna solve the problem with Gaza. And us and Gaza, we're gonna say, we are gonna go for a one-state solution. That's what we need to do. Is I think these cards cannot do the one-state solution. It needs to be a new political platform. So and also the same work needs to happen in Israel. So what I see the strategy, unfortunately, we are in a situation, I like to use the metaphor of the puzzle. We are in a new puzzle. And we have various parts of the puzzle are being worked on. The political strategy or political platform is the one that's going to bring it all together. But we still don't have the means to do it because the balance of power on the ground is against a one-state solution. This doesn't mean that we don't have power because, as you rightly said, Jeff, the Palestinians are not going anywhere. Israel right now said, okay, I cannot get rid of the Palestinians, I'll fragment them, I'll divide them. It succeeded. And after I divide them, you know what? I'm also going to get the Gulfi saying the Arab Palestinians are the losers. The Abraham Accords, we're making great business. Iran is much more of a problem than Israel. We're having alliance now between a settler colonial state and authoritarian states. Okay? So militarily, to establish a one-state solution today is very difficult. But this doesn't mean that it is not right. It is right. How do we work for it? The way I see it, we need more work, like the work you're doing with the One Democratic State campaign. I think that's a very important work. We need to work on talking about that also in the West Bank and Gaza and all the refugees. There's lots of mobilization happening internationally because I agree totally, the international community and the Palestinian outside Palestine have an important role to play, but they are not the one who's going to solve it. I'm fully of that, and I'm by now a diaspora Palestinian. I think they're very important as a role to play, but the one who's going to make a one-state solution, a one-state reality are the 12 million people living between the river and the sea. The work of the activists in Boston is very important because, 20 years ago, it was very difficult for a Palestinian to talk. Now everybody wants to be a Palestinian. This is a success. Okay. Now, Okay, you could also, everybody wants to be a Palestinian and you trivialize Palestine, but this is not the point because you're generating popular support among the Jewish community in the United States, among the activist community in the United States, that the Palestinian life matters, that the Palestinian struggle and the Black Lives Matters are interconnected because it's a struggle for justice and equality. This is what we need to all the time emphasize. This is important strategic and political work to be done, that to show the interconnection between racism and oppression, to show the connection between neoliberal economics and inequality, the struggle for equality in the United by the African Americans and others against racism and for equality is linked to the Palestinian struggle. So I think you and I, we agree what is the solution. I think everybody, what people don't know is how to get there. And your work and the work of the One State campaign is very important because it provides a niche, a nest for people to work. And there are many others. If you only know the number of people who work on alternative to partition, one state here, one state that. The question is how we're going to create this political platform. And creating this political platform that will come with a political agenda is not yet available. When will it? I'm sure it's going to happen. I have no doubt about it's going to happen. Will it happen in 5 years? Will it happen in 10 years? I know it's going to happen. But we also live in a geostrategic reality that we need to take into consideration. So I'll stop.
Skip, do you want me to respond or
yeah, either
time and process and everything?
Either you could respond to what Leila just said, or you could share a further reflection, or you could ask her a question. And just a note about the time for those who entered late, Leila has to leave at 1 o'clock. And so my suggestion is we go another 5 minutes or so with the back and forth between Jeff and Leila. And then we go to questions and comments from everybody. And I think, Dean, do you have any suggestion about how to field those?
Well, I looked at one of the questions about, so I've been looking at some, maybe Jeff wants to look at other. There's one that says that also Israel wants a one-state solution. We agree. I think one of the biggest success that we reached in the discursive level is that now everybody knows we live in a one-state reality. That's what I always like to tell people. We live in a one-state reality, but it's not a one-state solution. Mm-hmm. This one-state reality that we're living in is Israel, which is a settler colonial reality. How are you going to transform this settler colonial reality into a democratic reality is the core issue. And that's what we mean. So when we're talking about a one-state solution, we talk about democratic states where all those who live on the land have equal political rights, also equal economic rights for the matter, okay? And nobody has settler privilege or national privilege. Everybody is equal. That's what we talk about when we talk about the one state. The challenge is how do we get there? And that's what I was trying to explain. So I hope I have answered one of the questions.
Well,
I say?
Okay, sorry.
Go ahead, Jeff. I just wanted to say, if folks want to participate, there's a couple of ways you can do it. You can raise your hand. There's a little hand under reactions at the bottom of your screen. You can also put your question in the chat, or you can go like this. But there's 100 of you, so you might not be noticed. I suggest to either raise your hand or put a question in the chat. But go ahead, Jeff, please.
Well, just a short comment, and in a way, a kind of a hard question for Leila. I think Leila put her finger right on the problem that we have, or one of the essential problems we have, and that is that there's no political vehicle for moving us forward. In other words, we can have the best programs in the world and the most wonderful analyses and so on, but if there's no political vehicle, then we're stuck. And of course, the political vehicle was the PA is obviously not the political vehicle. The political vehicle was the PLO, but Arafat and Abu Mazen together dismantled the PLO pretty much dismantled it. So it's almost moribund in a way. Now, when we go out, the One Democratic State campaign people, and talk to Palestine, one of our problems is not that Palestinians don't agree with our program or with the one state idea. That's really not a problem, because as Leila said, that has a long, long history in Palestine. The problem is they say, yeah, but it's utopian. It's academic. And we have to kind of, Leila and I have to be sensitive to the fact that academic in the real world means irrelevant. And one of the things is they've made Israel into this huge monster. Israel would never allow it, as if Israel is going to determine the contours of Palestinian liberation. So that's one of the problems we have to really deal with, not only having a good idea, but somehow to convey to the Palestinian people that this isn't utopian. Now, so in other words, our messaging to some degree, and this is where you guys abroad could play a big role. If I can understand the Palestinians are sitting isolated. They're in Gaza. They're in area B of the West Bank, or worse, area C of the West Bank. Or even inside Israel, there are very isolated pockets of Palestinians. And they're dealing with this oppressive, aggressive Israeli war machine. And this constant process of ethnic cleansing that's going on, house demolitions that I deal in, and so on. And I don't think they know. I don't think they know how potentially powerful they are. I don't think they know that. They don't know about the Amnesty Apartheid report. Most Palestinians, they don't know about you guys, or about the churches, or about all the international organizations all over. I think the Palestinian issue has raised to the level of the anti-apartheid struggle. But I don't think, and Palestinians in the refugee camps, certainly outside the country, don't know all this stuff. So part of our job should be, and I guess more the Palestinian part of the job should be trying to communicate to them that this is a real struggle. And they can prevail. If I thought this was just academic, I wouldn't waste my time. But I really think, in a cold analysis, the ANC did it, the FLN did it in Algeria, by strategically and effectively mobilizing the international civil society, not governments yet. Governments will come later, behind a clear vision and a political program that I think we can prevail. So I guess, part of the problem is that there's no vehicle, So I guess one question I would have for Leila, that might know better than me to some degree, because I know there are some attempts to have new elections for the Palestinian National, the PNC, National Council. People are talking about somehow resuscitating the PLO. Now, if that doesn't happen, is there the possibility of, I don't know if you'd call it a new PLO, but some civil society initiative in terms of the Palestinians that would begin to provide that vehicle? Because that's, it seems to me, where we're really stuck.
Yeah, I think it's
are there people that are really dealing with that issue?
Yeah, you're totally right. The question of reviving the PLO is something that has happened, as people have been talking about for the past 25 years. And I think, personally, right now, I think you cannot revive the PLO anymore. The historical role of the PLO is over, largely because Abbas killed it. There has been various attempts to have a PNC meeting. It all failed. And I think now we have the most of the Palestinians who live in the West Bank, Gaza, and inside 48, for them, the PLO doesn't mean anything. I mean, who remembers the PLO now? Whoever is in the PLO are men above 80. So I think what's happening de facto is that the PLO is, unfortunately, no longer relevant because its leaders made it irrelevant. And you have now other pockets of political activity happening in Gaza, West Bank, and inside 48. The question is, do we have a new platform that can represent all Palestinian voices? I think now that we live in the 21st century, where we are in a world of social media, of Instagram and Facebook and Zoom and all that, I think it might become an irrelevant question. The relevant question will be, how will you have a representative body of Palestinian that will take the case of the one democratic state? And I think that, unfortunately, we would like to imagine that we can have people going into various villages and various towns and refugee camps and make the campaign work like parties. But they don't function this way, especially that we are dealing with two repressive regimes, whether we like it or not. We're taking with the repressive regime in Hamas in Gaza and a repressive PA in the West Bank. But this doesn't mean that there is not dynamic and political consciousness. And we really saw it clearly in April in what became called the Unity Intifada. We saw a decentralized, grassroots, bottom-up activity and unity across Palestinians in the West Bank, in Jerusalem, in Gaza, and in the West, and inside 48, that actually did scare the Palestinian Authority. The killing of Nizar Banat and the violence with which the Palestinian Authority attacked all the demonstrators in July and August was sending a horrible message saying, don't become politically active. So the repression of the Palestinian Authority has become bigger. Is it sustainable? No, but if you're talking over the next 2-3 years, people on the Palestinian side, I think, are trying to think and organize how do we create alternative leaderships. And we are starting to see that now we're going to have the municipal elections, for example. That's an important vehicle because Abu Mazen decided to cancel the legislative and presidential elections. So there is mass mobilization. The ruling parties are trying to contain it. I believe they will not be able to contain it much longer because the Palestinians are fed up. But I also think that Palestinian activism is also tied with what's going to happen in other Arab countries. Because I feel that we are at a juncture today in the Middle East, in Palestine, Israel, also inside, where the Arab uprising that happened 10 years ago failed, but they're not over. They're gonna come back again, because people accept oppression if they're eating, but they will not accept oppression if they're also poor. So we are at a juncture. We don't know what's going to happen over the next 10 years, but what we know is happening is that everybody, the campaign where people are saying, I refuse injustice. I am entitled to dignity and equality. These voices are growing in number. And the way they mobilize through various means, not through political parties. We will still need a political platform, but when will it happen? That's what I don't know. So the work that the campaign is doing is very important. And people will listen to it. And you're right, people, when they say Palestinians like that, they like always say, no, is it not realistic? Israel will never accept. I've heard it so many times. I've heard it 15 years ago. And I said, yeah, of course Israel will not accept a one-state solution. This is not the issue. This is not the point. The point is, how will we be ready for a one-state reality? And you need new people who say, I just don't care about the nation state. I care about having access to the sea. I want to have equal rights. And you're going to hear that more and more. But we are also, this is happening at the same time where tribalism is increasing in Palestine. And that's a problem. And it's a political tactic to increase tribalism. So we're having two forces, progressive forces on the one hand, and unprogressive forces. I think things are moving in the right direction, but there are going to be setbacks, as you saw the reaction of the PA to Palestinian mobilization on the streets, whether in Gaza or inside the West Bank. So my answer to you is, I'd like as much as you to have this political platform and political party. But despite my young age, which is no longer so young, I think we still need more time. But what I'm positive about and happy about is that the discourse has changed, which 20 years ago was much more difficult. Now we have Amnesty International calling it apartheid. We have B'Tselem calling it apartheid. We've been talking about apartheid for the past 25 years. Now it's being normalized. Okay, we have the Biden administration aware that two-state solution is dead. We've been saying it's dead for the past 25 years. So people are at a loss of a program, but it's going to happen because various activities are happening, and all the political activism happening is circling around the fundamental Palestinian rights, the fundamental indigenous people's rights, and the fundamental equality of right. And also we have examples that settlers and natives live together, but the only way they can live together is as equal citizens. This needs still more work, but it's happening. I'll stop there.
Before Leila has to leave in a few minutes, a question that comes several times through the chat relates to international law. And I know both of you have referred to it already, but beginning with Leila, maybe you could say a little bit more about the role and function of international law.
Yes, international law has defended always Palestinian rights, has defended the Palestinian right of return, Palestinian human rights, even Palestinian statehood, okay? But international law, as you know, can be a weapon, can be used to our advantage and disadvantage. I think the international law has a very important role to play insofar as it can uphold Palestinian rights, and I think we should rely on that. Because also international law upholds the right of those who live in Israel today to still live in Israel. It doesn't take away, it takes away the privileges of the settlers, but doesn't take away the right of the Jews to live in Palestine. So I think international law is an incredible tool to be used. But also, I think the best way to use international law, apart from protecting Palestinian rights, is to uphold the importance of having a democratic constitutional state that ensures the equality of all the citizens. I think that's where international law can play a very important role. But it also cannot play it without Palestinians and Israelis or whoever advocates for a one state using that international law to our advantage. So I hope this.
Jeff? The microphone?
I mean, I certainly agree with Leah. International law it's like a bookend, I think, importance. In other words, on the one hand, it certainly affects the political discourse. It supports Palestinian rights, but it puts Palestinian rights in broader categories that people that are involved in other struggles. I mean, Leila mentioned Black Lives Matter. Other struggles can relate to as well. In other words, they're put in universal terms, not in terms of particular groups. So that's very important to begin to bring the Palestinians into the discourse of the rights, the national rights, collective rights, individual rights, human rights, civil rights, of individual rights of people in general. This isn't only a particular Palestinian demand. And then on the other hand, of course, as we're in the post-colonial, after decolonization, as we're beginning to restructure the new state and society we want, international law also plays an important role, especially in terms of informing the Constitution that has to be developed. Where I'm maybe a little bit more skeptical maybe than Leila is I think a lot of Palestinian activists in the US and Europe, maybe because there is no political plan. And in the sense, the struggle in some ways has become less political over the years since there's this vacuum, the two-state is gone, we don't have an alternative. A lot of Palestinian activists have begun to fall back on what I call the human rights, the human rights approach. And that is putting all our eggs in the human rights basket and saying, well, we have to, there's a Fourth Geneva Convention and there's all these international laws and let's, see if we can get them. I think that's futile. I mean, the corpus of international law is wonderful. I mean, there's international laws about everything that are great, but there is no implementation. The only way you implement international law is through the Security Council. Enough said. The United States is not going to allow any international law to be applied to Israel, of course. So that we can't rely on international law, I think, as a political tool, as a political instrument. We have to be political, and we have to adopt international law language. We have to use it to morally and legally support our program and our struggle. But we can't rely on international law by itself as a standalone thing, the human rights approach, without and I think that's a weakness of the BDS campaign. I think that's what they do, and that's what a lot of groups are beginning to do, talk about human rights, international law all the time, but that's not political. And international law isn't intended to be political. It's not a political program. It provides certain foundations for a political structure, but a political struggle has to be political, and it has to go beyond human rights and international law, in my view.
Leila had to leave, as you may have noticed, and it is now time for the audience, you, to to raise issues, questions, concerns, reflect on what's been said. And I suggest you do it with the old hand, which can be done preferably through the raise hand tool in the reaction toolbar. It's at the lower part of your screen, hopefully, depending on your system. And you just open reactions and you'll find raise hand. So, and I will call on people as I see you raising your hands. Doing it like this is not so good when there are close to 100 people.
Skip, may I say a word? This is Dean here, and I want to acknowledge that to my surprise, I came into church at 11:30, and there were 180 participants signed up. There is a limit on our Zoom account to 100. I frantically tried to figure out how to add and set up another account and could not do that, which means that a lot of people didn't get to participate. I want everybody to spread the word that this whole thing is recorded on Community Church of Boston's YouTube channel and can be accessed there. And I'm deeply apologetic to everybody. We had no idea what a large number of people wanted to join us here. So I just wanted to say that, and maybe start with a question from a YouTube person. And here it is for Jeff. And thank you again, Leila. Let's see, it's coming up. Question from YouTube viewer. There is a limited amount of land in the West Bank and East Jerusalem, and the situation in Gaza looks very more dire. Do either of you have a sense of urgency about a just solution?
Yeah, we've been talking about that for the last hour, I think. No, we do. And I think, like I said, the vision is there. The analysis is there. There's the beginning of a program that's already there that we're helping to put together. But we still need a lot of work in terms of political organization and strategizing and really beginning to work together much more. Leila gives a timeline of 5 or 10 years. It'll take us, I would hope we could do it quicker than that, and I'm certainly trying to work towards that. But I think it's true. There is an urgency. That's the word I use as well. There's an urgency because we don't control the geopolitical system, and Israel is building massively all the time in the West Bank. It's normalizing with the Arab countries. The Palestinians are becoming marginalized more and more, and all of which makes our struggle more difficult. And so there really is an urgent timeline to this. This isn't just an academic discussion. And, but again, this has to be led by Palestinians. And, there's a lot of, they've been fragmented by Israel and the international community all these years. You have whole communities that haven't been in touch with each other for generations. There's no PLO anymore. There's no common forum for discussion. The leadership is really, the good leaders, the real leaders, I would say, are either dead or in prison or in Israeli prisons. So the Palestinians really have, beyond the struggle itself, tremendous obstacles to overcome simply to come together, behind some kind of a vision and a program. So I understand those difficulties and the time it has to take. On the other hand, there is the urgency of the political moment. And so we have to try to maneuver between those two things.
I'll call on people in the Zoom room because I can see the hands. But maybe, Dean, we can alternate between the Facebook questions. I don't have access to those and the ones on Zoom. Is that okay with you?
There was only one YouTube question so far. So
Okay.
Why don't you just go ahead and let her rip.
Okay. Lynn Siegel.
Unmute, please, Lynn.
Yeah, my thought is just if international law, then what do you, if there is no such thing as law, I mean, on your city street, if there was no such thing as a red stoplight anymore, we would not have, anything left, So what do you do? I mean, after 70 years of a violation of international law, does that make it somehow justified? I don't think so. It makes the conscience of the world at held up here.
No, I'm not against international law in any way. I deal a lot with international law. And it has a very important role to play. All I'm saying is that international law is not a political vehicle. You're not going to liberate Palestine through international law. And especially because, like I said, international law, the laws are on the books. Everything Israel does in the occupation is illegal. If you go to the Fourth Geneva Convention that regulates how occupying powers have to treat what's called protected peoples living under hostile occupation, and you go item by item, article by article, Israel has violated every single article for years of the Fourth Geneva Convention, which is a fundamental basis of international law. Okay, so the International Court of Justice in The Hague, which, don't tell Amy Cohen Barrett this, it's supposed to be the highest court in the world, the International Court of Justice in The Hague, ruled that the wall that Israel is building and has built is illegal. It has to be dismantled by international law. Great, okay, so what? In other words, unless we can find it's not that we have to forget international law. International law has to be a crucial part, integrated into our political plans, but we can't rely on international law as a vehicle for liberating Palestine. It just can't work like that. We have to work politically. And, it's not, the American Revolution was political. It wasn't, they had a lot of lawyers and they did a wonderful constitution and everything else. But when it came to liberating, a settler colonial project, which is kind of a contradiction in terms. You went to George Washington and Valley Forge and the war. And then you got to a point where you could begin to talk about international law or law in general and human rights. So I think we simply have to find the right balance between those things. But all I'm saying is I'm warning that the human rights approach, as it's called, that many are beginning to adopt more and more, is limited. And it's not political, and it's not intended to be political internationally.
For those who arrived late, wondering where Leila is, she had to leave at 1 o'clock. Also, there are a lot of good questions in the chat. I can't possibly monitor them all. I advise you, if you're interested, to save the chat, and you can go through those yourself. And anybody thinking about analysis or activism might want to look through some of those questions, because I think some of them are truly relevant. Pedro Rosario, it's your turn. Thank you for waiting.
Hello, everyone. I have a question to Jeff. Are you aware of any recent contacts with the political representatives of each side of the issue, namely the Palestinian Authority and the Israeli government? And if yes, with this particular proposal of a one-state solution, and if yes, what was the feedback?
No, there's no meaningful contact at all. There's no negotiations. There's no political process. The last dying breath of a political process, of negotiations, even of the two-state idea, was when John Kerry came as Secretary of State in 2014. In the last days of the Obama administration, he came, and he came here with 320 advisors. So this was a no punches pulled kind of an effort to try to somehow salvage something, and the whole thing collapsed. And as a matter of fact, not only did John Kerry blame Israel on national television in a very blunt kind of a way, but Martin Indyk, who was the head of AIPAC, who was the American ambassador to Israel, who's in the Jewish establishment up to his neck, he came out and said it was Israel that destroyed the two-state solution and any chance of any kind of political process. So nothing exists today whatsoever. And you have no contacts. On the contrary, the Bennett government that just came into office, it came in because it's a coalition of right and left and so on, Zionist left, came in, with the understanding that they are not going to deal with the Palestinian issue at all. In other words, the only way this government can survive is if they deal with domestic issues, housing and economy and education and things like that, and not the Palestinian issue. So the whole thing is formally set aside. And I think Israel feels that it's won already. It doesn't have to talk. First of all, it has a collaborationist regime in the Palestinian Authority. So here Abu Mazen, imagine this, Gantz, Benny Gantz, who's the Minister of Defense, invites Abu Mazen, the Palestinian, to come visit him in Israel. In other words, it isn't like a Palestinian is going from one city in Palestine to another city of Palestine. He's going and expresses it in this way. I'm going to visit Benny Gantz in his home inside Israel, in Rosh Ayin, which is built on a Palestinian village that was destroyed in 1948. So that's the degree to which this whole thing has been depoliticized, on the way to normalization, and Israel feels really that it's mopping up. So that, we're in a situation where, in my more cynical moments, I could say, my next book should be How a Settler Colonial Enterprise Succeeded. That's the way Israel sees it. We've succeeded. We have the entire country. We've Judaized the entire country. We've taken 90% of the Palestinians and confined them to little enclaves on 15% of the land of the country. The international community accepts this. The United States government has really taken this issue off the agenda completely. The Arab world is normalizing with us. We're selling weapons all over, to China, to India, to everybody that has any money to buy, to Saudi Arabia. What's wrong with this picture? And so, I think from the Israeli point of view, there's no motivation to, what are we going to negotiate? We're winning. We won. Why should we negotiate? And I think Israel is right in a way, but I think, again, the one actor that they don't take into account are you, the international civil society. You're the ones that ended the apartheid regime through your governments. You're the ones that ended the Vietnam War. I mean, a lot of you are that generation. In other words, international civil society, when it is mobilized and when it is focused, can be very effective. And I think that's Israel's Achilles heel. But the Palestinian Authority never mobilizes, never reaches out to the international to activists in any way. You don't even know if there is a Palestinian ambassador to the US. Certainly not what the person's name is, because who knows? They don't do that. And that's something that we have to do much more effectively, but we're not quite at that level.
Nancy Murray is about to speak, but before she does, I would like to introduce her. She is a key person, activist and analyst in the Boston area, co-founder of the Alliance for Water Justice in Palestine. Nancy. And key person in putting together this webinar too. Thank you, Nancy, for that.
Good to
Thank
see
you, Skip, and thank you so much, Jeff. I really liked your last book, and I liked the one before about the military. And that really, I think, comes to the heart of why our government is so hard to budge. And I don't know if you want to say more about that, but I have a specific question, which is to see if you had a chance to look at this 100-page confederation proposal put together by, I think, Beilin, who was involved in Oslo, and Hiba Husseini. I've just read accounts of it, and it had what seemed to be an interesting way of kicking off, getting two sides to come together and have a discussion, namely through an elected assembly. And then, I won't go into it, but if you have more that you could say about it, This assembly is to just deal with issues of trust and this and that, and not political issues. And then as time moves on, the other issues would come to the table. Is anybody looking at this? Is it a complete non-starter? Should it be a complete non-starter?
Well, in my view, it is a complete non-starter.
Mm-hmm.
The problem isn't so much technical. There's a lot of ways that we could organize conferences and things about confederations and federations and one state and two states, for that matter. There's people that are still talking about that. What should the Constitution look like? How could you do this? Or that? In other words, a lot of people are dealing with those kind of technicalities. But when we say Zionism is settler colonialism, that means something. It means that you have to decolonize a settler. You can't take the sides. First of all, in settler colonialism, there are no sides. That's why I don't use the word, Leila uses it, the Israel-Palestine conflict. Because a conflict assumes there are two sides, which first of all gives legitimacy to both sides. And I don't think Zionism has a legitimacy. It's a settler colonial movement. It has its, I'm not denying that Jews have religious and historical and cultural ties to this country. That's fine. But you can't translate that into a settler colonial movement and take over the country. And the very essence of settler colonialism is exactly that, to Judaize Palestine. That's the whole purpose of Zionism. For the last 130 years, that's the purpose, to take over the country, to transform an Arab country into a Jewish country, to transform Palestine into the land of Israel. And they've been very upfront from 1909 until today in the Bennett government. People are very upfront. The Zionists haven't hidden that agenda in any way. I can pull out 1,000 quotes if I was pressed. So the point is, I guess, first of all, that you have to understand what settler colonialism is, that it's not about negotiating. In settler colonialism, there is no other side. Israel has never recognized the existence of a Palestinian people. Never. In Oslo, all Israel did was to recognize the PLO as a negotiating partner. That's it. Now, what we're negotiating, they also didn't come out. We weren't negotiating a two-state solution in Oslo. Rabin was very clear about that. If we're negotiating for two states, that's prejudicing the outcome. So it was open-ended negotiations with the PLO without recognizing until today the very existence of the Palestinians or their national rights. So Israel doesn't see two sides. And therefore you're missing the good faith. In other words, why would Israel, who thinks it's winning, who's Judaizing the country, which is the whole point of Zionism, that has transformed an Arab country to a certain degree into a Jewish country, what motivation would they have to go into a confederation or a federation or one state or anything else? They have to be forced to do so. And that's very much, I think, like the whites in South Africa. I don't think the ANC, and that's what Leila was referring to, when you hear a lot of Palestinians say, well, we could never decolonize because Israel won't allow it. Well, that was the same situation the ANC was in South Africa. The whites were all, except a few that were in the ANC, the vast majority of the whites in South Africa were not going to dismantle apartheid. They weren't going to just decolonize a situation that they're enjoying. They're on top. Why would they do that? And the ANC understood that, and they bypassed them. They didn't try to talk to them. I'm I try to talk to Israelis, but I'm not relying on that. I think we have to accept the fact that Israeli Jews are not going to be part of this process. And that's why I said in the tripartite alliance, we have to bypass them and go directly to you guys, to the international civil society. So that all these ideas that are nice on paper, of let's have a conference and let's organize this, it's missing the whole point. And the whole point is that Zionism and Israel have never given up the idea that this is our country exclusively. It belongs to us and we're taking it back. And unless you deal with that reality and build that into your political program, you can come up with the greatest ideas in the world, but they're really irrelevant. That's my view.
Claire Sheridan.
Hi, could you address the pushback against normalization by young Palestinian-led activist groups? I'm thinking specifically of a group like the JISR Collective, which won't sign on to any petitions in support of the 6 NGOs that have been declared terrorist organizations because they see them as trying to normalize the situation by accepting money, for instance, from the EU, that kind of thing. And this seems to be a growing, feeling among young Palestinians.
Yeah. Well, I can't represent Palestinians. I feel a little uncomfortable with Leila not being here because my voice becomes the only voice and it's not a Palestinian voice. I think that has to do partly with this vacuum that we're in. The people don't know where we're going. People are kind of lost. And so everybody's falling back sometimes on their ultimate demands. In other words, there's no process here in any way. And so people can kind of, fortress themselves in these extreme demands that we want this and that, because there's no political process anyway to ruin.
Yeah.
I'm very much, our organization, the Israeli Committee Against House Demolitions, we supported BDS before it was called BDS, actually. And we certainly understand the idea of anti-normalization. Before BDS, in the year 2000, PINGO, which is a Palestinian NGO network, came out with a call against normalization. But what they said was this, that if an Israeli organization accepts the 3 principles that were later taken into BDS, in other words, equal rights for Palestinians in Israel, ending the occupation, and the right of return of refugees, then that working with that organization is not normalization. Those are our comrade organizations with us. Yeah. So in other words, what they're saying, and they were right, was we're not going to work with an Israeli organization, even on good issues like women's rights or education or agricultural development, unless there's a political agenda to it, unless that organization is explicitly against occupation, accepts these elements, we're simply not going to do that. And I think that's a good position. Where there's been an erosion over the last few years, and I think this is a problem, is that the anti-normalization has begun to affect all relations between Palestinian and Israeli groups. For example, I can't go to a Palestinian campus. A lot of Palestinian organizations and people won't work with Israelis because there's anti-normalization. And I think that's it's not only counterproductive, but it's beginning to misunderstand the nature of the struggle. I think part of what we're trying to do, and I think Leila was reflecting this, as we move from the idea that this is a conflict, the Palestine-Israel conflict, to the idea that this is an anti-colonial movement of decolonizing a settler colonial regime in order to create a democratic state of equal rights for all its citizens. As we redefine in that way, there is no place for this anti-normalization idea in a colonial struggle. In other words, in a colonial struggle, everyone who's anti-colonial, and you saw that in the ANC, they had a lot of white members. Everyone who's anti-colonial is a comrade, as I mentioned before. So that I think this anti-normalization idea is good in that we shouldn't normalize with Israeli groups or other groups that aren't political, but at the same time, we have to be careful that we're not throwing out the baby with the bathwater and not working with groups that really are our anti-colonial partners in this struggle. And I think that that's where these groups are missing these new developments in the struggle that I think are going to really paralyze them.
Thank you. Thank you.
Faye Strigler.
Oh, hi. Thank you so much, Jeff Halper. This is really wonderful. I'm trying to figure out the players, some of the players in this that I don't understand. Who are these right-wing settlers? I don't know who they are, and I also I don't know. And there are also a lot of Israelis that are moving to the United States now. And I'm wondering, are they moving here because apartheid is making it, making Israel an uncomfortable place to live? Or are they moving here because they're afraid they're going to lose their privileges? So if you could talk more about that. I have no idea of who these people are.
Well, look, basically, what the right wing, the very militant, especially religious, but very right wing Israelis, were fairly marginal for many years. I mean, in fact, if you go back in history, before the state and in the early years of the state with the Labor Party, they were really the problem. They were left-wing. They were socialists. They talked the right language, Golda Meir and Ben Gurion and even Rabin, and all the people in the 40s and 50s and 60s and so on. But in fact, they were the real problem because they were the settler colonists. In other words, Israel was not created by the Likud or Begin or right-wing religious people. They were extremely marginal. This whole settler colonial enterprise was created by what's today the Labor Party and Meretz people. I mean, even Meretz on the Israeli left are Zionist left, And then if you look at the occupation happened under a labor government of Eshkol, who moved very quickly with Dayan and Golda Meir and others to make the occupation permanent. I mean, settlements began right away. East Jerusalem was the next right away. They wouldn't deal with the PLO until Oslo, which was like, 20 some years later. So that this whole structure, the settler colonial enterprise and the whole structure and everything it created was really done by what we consider liberal, left-wing, secular Zionists, you see? And these other people were very marginal. But over the last, then Begin was elected in 1977. I think it has to do partly with the Mizrahi, Jews from the Middle East, the working class people that were coming in, that were very much on the right. You began to have the growth of a religious community here. You had Gush Emunim, which is a very messianic settler movement beginning to settle in the West Bank. And 10 years after the occupation began, Begin was elected. And from that time, the right wing, Ben Gurion used to have a law in his political world of saying, we'll never go in a coalition with Begin or the communists. I mean, that's how marginal Begin was. But then he became normalized, you see. And ever since then, Israel has moved further and further to the right. We have now a religious kind of a settler supporting prime minister, no less. But at the same time, again, the idea of settlement, I think, has been normalized. I mean, the vast majority of Israel is almost, there's like almost 800,000 settlers in the West Bank and East Jerusalem. And we're not, in major cities. So it's been, you have traffic jams of people commuting from Ma'ale Adumim in the middle of the West Bank into Jerusalem to work every day. So it's all been normalized. And I think that's the problem we're dealing with. It's not seen as political anymore. So it's like, trying to force a political discussion on people that don't see any political issue. What's the issue here? We're here. It's our country. It's, any problems we have with Arabs, as we call them, we don't call them Palestinians, is security. So they're compartmentalized in the security box. And everything else is just normal. You know, we're living a normal life in Ma'ale Adumim. There's a merits chapter in Ma'ale Adumim. You know, it's within the consensus. That's the Israeli code. And I think that's what's happened. This has all been normalized, and the right has become the new center, and the left, the Zionist left, have become more and more marginalized. And the left, like me, the anti-Zionist left, are, you know, people don't even know where to put us at all. So that's really the situation. And I don't think politics is motivating the people, the Israelis that are moving to the States. They're moving to a lot of other places. It has a lot to do with economics. You know, they're in high tech, they're in businesses, you know, they're in the defense industry and so on. So there's a lot of reasons for Israelis to move. They don't always move permanently. You know, today you can kind of live half here and half there and go back and forth and so on. But I think people are leaving for economic reasons, including, you know, you have quite a few working class Israelis that move to the States as well, again, for economic reasons. So I don't think it's a political situation that's pushing about. I think it's simply an individual choice.
Gail Page. Could you unmute yourself, please? Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Right?
We hear you.
Yes.
Good. So what I hear you saying, Jeff, is that the ultimate solution for this mess is in the international community. And what to me, that means worldwide BDS. I don't know how else the international community can have this influence.
That's right. No, I certainly. The problem that I have with BDS today is that it isn't connected to a political solution.
Right.
You see, BDS is we use BDS in the anti-apartheid struggle. Really what made apartheid collapse was, you know, when the Ford Motor Company pulled out of South Africa. When we made it so, you know, so unsavory for a company to be associated with South Africa and apartheid that they all began to leave. That was one of the major pillars that made, you know, when that collapsed, that made the regime collapse. So BDS is certainly a key element of this, but it has to be connected to an end game, which it isn't because we don't have an end game. That's our fatal flaw today, to go back to our whole discussion. In other words, in South Africa, the end game was one person, one vote. Mm-hmm. That was the agenda. So when de Klerk came to Mandela in prison and offered him, let's do power sharing. Let's have a 3-house government, you know, whites, Asians, and Black Africans. Let's do this, let's do that, confederations, all the ideas you hear thrown out with the Palestinians. Mandela said no, the ANC said no. One person, one vote, that's our end game, period. And they stuck with that, and that's what happened. So that we as anti-apartheid activists abroad, we could say, yes, Ford, you don't do business in South Africa. We boycotted all kinds of commercial companies and got our governments on board with this end game in mind. So BDS today has that potential, but it doesn't have an end game. Why are we BDSing? So I think BDS is important in that it keeps the Palestinian issue on the agenda. I don't think the targets are especially good. I don't think Hewlett-Packard and some of these. I would rather, BDS go after the military industry with Israel. You know, including in Boston, you've got all kinds of companies, robotic companies. You know, one of the most famous robotic companies in the world. That's a military base, is based in Boston, and they're very connected to the Technion, which is the Israeli army's military laboratory. So you've got, why isn't that the center of BDS? In other words, we've got to have targets that are more relevant and targets that people understand that there's a relationship. Hewlett-Packard, could be important in a way, and certain, but you've got to explain it. It's not obvious, and so I think the targeting isn't right with BDS. And again, the problem is that BDS does not support a political program that, in a sense, it can't right now. But when some critical mass comes up about the one-state solution, and as Leila said, that's beginning to be more and more of a discussion of the Palestinian community, I would hope that BDS begins to say, we are BDSing for one person, one vote. It's basically the same agenda as South Africa. Without that, it's symbolic and it's good to do and so on, but it isn't yet political, in my view.
What may I just add to that? What other pressure can the international community provide for this?
Well, I mean, that's the problem, that gets back to what we were talking about before, is that without a political program, that's what our One Democratic State campaign is trying to put in. Without a program, in a way, you guys are floundering. You're a very important ally of you're the most important ally of the Palestinians, but you have to have your marching orders. In other words, if you go to your member of Congress, and that person says, okay, I'm listening, what do you want? And you don't have an answer to that. Well, human rights, international law, end the conflict, and the occupation, these kind of general slogans, politicians, their eyes are going to glaze over and they're going to show you the door. So I think that's our problem. And in a way, you guys have to keep doing what you're doing. What you're doing is very important. BDS is important. The campaigns you're doing, the informational campaigns, webinars, trying to work with your members of Congress and maybe people locally as well, and the media in terms of the amnesty report, things that come up all the time that, keep Palestine in the spotlight, keep it on the map. In a way, it's a rear guard action at this point, but it's really important to do until such a time that a Palestinian voice emerges and said, this is a political program we want you to accept. We want you to promote, like the ANC did. And then I think you'll really come into your own. Right now, you're in a difficult position of sort of having to figure out what to do without the leadership of Palestinians and even of critical Israelis, I think. And that puts you in a very disempowered position in many ways, I think.
Thank you.
I can see that Dean has picked up his guitar, which means we're getting close to the end of this very spacious opportunity to talk first with Leila and Jeff, and now, because Leila had to leave, with Jeff alone. So it's really a rare opportunity. And if there is one closing question, before I ask my closing question, I see who is Guy raising his hand. So why don't you speak by unmuting your microphone.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Jeff, for focusing a little bit on the anti-colonial aspect of any program, if there's to be a program. My question has to do with what seems to be a little bit of a tension between the anti-colonial, sometimes it's one person, one vote in some situations. In other situations, there is an aspect of the demand to make us whole. So from some Native American groups here in Hawaii, by Native Hawaiians, there's perception that just getting equal rights in terms of one person, one vote is not enough. There's a need, there's no equality until people or peoples are made whole by recognizing what they have lost and some form of reparations to create a greater genuine equality, of which one person, one vote is just one element. So if you would, could you give some thought to that, some sort of reaction in terms of the dimensions of linkage amongst anti-colonial struggles? Thank you.
Well, look, I mean, there's actually a couple elements here. One person, one vote is a piece of it. Another piece of the puzzle is nationalism. I mean, Palestinians and Israeli Jews are national groups. Yes. So one person, one vote doesn't meet that need. And we have to, and that's where part of our rethinking is taking place. Some people are saying, well, the national precedes individual votes in terms of its importance to people. They have to have a national expression. And therefore, since both national groups are there, we're stuck with each other, it should be a binational state. You know, there's other people that are saying, no, that's, you know, a lot of Palestinians don't like that idea because it legitimizes Zionism, and they fear it also it allows Israel to continue to dominate. And that's one reason why they're going in the one person, one vote direction. So there's a lot of issues that remain open. These are still issues that have to be worked out. Once we get to our new state, our new polity, our new civil society in the post-colonial era, when there's a new us cheering on our football team in the World Cup, then we have to deal, it's true, with the whole issue of reconciliation and of making ourselves whole and of reparations and things like that. I mean, first of all, in our program and in any program that has any chance of succeeding, the refugees come back. So already a big gesture, more than a gesture, you know, has been made to substantially try to address, you know, historical wrong. The refugees and the descendants come home. Now, the whole issue of reparations really becomes an issue of the state. This isn't Israel, you know, paying reparations to Palestinians, because we don't have Israelis and Palestinians anymore as those kinds of political actors. We're all in the same state. So the state has to budget, whether it's reparations or compensation for land loss and properties, or simply programs to integrate the refugees and other Palestinians into society. That has to be done. Then you've got the whole issue of acknowledgement. And there, I think it's important. Now, a lot of countries, South Africa did that, although there was a lot of criticism of it in some ways, in that it let the white apartheid people off the hook in a way, saying we're sorry, and they just went home. There's a lot of countries like Argentina and Spain and others that have never had that kind of a process, and it's still an open wound. So I agree that that process has to take place, but it has to be further down the line, certainly after decolonization, because again, this idea that that this country belongs to us exclusively as Jews, and that's the moral thing, and anybody trying to foil that is the problem. Doesn't give that basis for any kind of real dialogue and reconciliation. So I think part of the decolonization process is decolonizing Israelis from Zionism. The Kenyan writer Ngugi has this idea of decolonizing the mind. And I think we have to go through that process. And as we begin to develop a new political community, a new daily life, and we're working together and living together and so on, then I think it'll be time for a reconciliation process. Not immediately with this independent new state, but down the line. I think it's very important, and I think it should happen, but it has to happen in its own time after these other processes have taken their course, I think.
Thank you.
Because of the time, I'm going to save my wrap-up question for the next webinar with Jeff. And we have two closings. One is Dean Stevens on the guitar and singing, and I have a very brief one. You might be wondering why this webinar is on Valentine's Day, crucial to some people in the United States. It was an accident. It was because of time constraints. However, listen to this and see if it relates. My heart is moved by all I cannot save. So much has been destroyed. I have to cast my lot with those who, age after age, perversely, with no extraordinary power, reconstitute the world. That's from Adrian Rich. So, Dean.
Oh, just as I replace the spotlight to put you on, late as usual, it's my turn. Folks, thank you so much for joining us. And Jeff and Leila, thank you as well. I want to inform you that a result of this event, we have raised at least $880, half of which will go to the Gaza Mental Health Foundation and the other half to the Israel Committee Against House Demolitions. I might not have said that exactly right, but Jeff, that's just such a remarkable effort on your part. And find out more at Jeff's website. I hope that we can physically host you here at Community Church sometime soon. The sooner the better, because if you see behind me, there's Martin Luther King, and below is a large bookcase that has the beginnings of a library about Palestine, Israel, and we hope that Jeff's and Leila's books will soon grace that bookcase and that they will be signed to us, and we will acquire those books and have them for you when you join us. So thanks again, everybody, for joining. We apologize, and please apologize to other people about our Zoom issue, which is that truly, with the kind of account we have, it only allowed 100 people to join, and more than at least 180 signed up. And that's remarkable. It's sort of the biggest thing we've ever done. Here we are. Absolutely love it. Absolutely love it. And thank you.
Can I say one thing quick?
Go ahead, Jeff.
Before you do your song, I just want to thank everybody. Thank you all, you and Skip and Nancy and the other people that organized this, and all of you that joined. This is a discussion. These are discussions we have to keep having a lot, especially with Palestinian and Israeli voices. I think that's very useful. Again, just the One Democratic State Campaign's website is onestatecampaign.org, and you can see our 10-point program on it. And the ICAHD website, the Israeli Committee Against House Demolitions, that has a lot of resources that you could really use, is just ICAHD, Israeli Committee Against House Demolitions, ICAHD.org. So those are two sites. And again, thank you very much for having me. And hopefully in the fall, I'll join you guys in Boston, okay? Okay.
All right. Thanks again, Jeff. And to conclude, a topic that doesn't seem to have a very easy conclusion. I have a beautiful song written by another community church musician participant. He was with us just before COVID hit, and his name is Tom Pacheco. And this is his wonderful song called Homeland. You can find it on YouTube, Homeland, Tom Pacheco. And I don't know it well, but I have the lyrics in front of me, and I will do my best to bid us farewell. And thank you again for joining us. Tell your friends that you can see this program on our YouTube channel, which is called Community Church of Boston Official. Have you ever been homeless? Have you ever been lost? When you know where your home is, but you can't get across? Do you dream of the orange groves where your grandfathers lived? Have you suffered such sorrow that it's hard to forgive? Cry, cry, cry as the refugees wait Shut your eyes to the sorrow, shut your eyes to their fate. Try, 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 they just won't go away. May the Palestine people have a homeland someday. To be scattered like ashes in the winds of the earth, with all dignity shattered, with all feelings of worth, living like gypsies on the road, on the run, with the heels of history, close but far as the sun. Cry, 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 as the refugees wait. Shut your eyes to their sorrow, shut your eyes to their fate, and try, 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 they just won't go away. May the Palestine people have a homeland someday. A people of culture, of genius and heart, mathematics and science, and grace in the arts. Caught between walls and the sea and the bombing attacks, with each settlement growing till there's no land at all. Cry, 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 as the refugees wait. Shut your eyes to the sorrow, shut your eyes to their fate. Try, 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 they just won't go away. May the Palestine people have their homeland someday. May the Palestine people have a homeland someday. May the Palestine people have their homeland someday. Someday, someday, someday.
Goodbye, everybody, and thanks again for participating and for whatever activism comes from this session. And thanks, Jeff, especially, and I hope to see you in Israel soon.
Thank you all.
Thank you, folks. And we are honored by your presence. Find out more about Community Church. We're here every Sunday morning. You join our email list and we'll send you a link, or you can also find us on our YouTube channel, live streamed every Sunday morning, 11 a.m. Eastern Time. This Sunday, all poetry, 2 hours worth, and all kinds of wonderful programs. Every Friday, we have a music concert all through this spring. So here we are. Estamos a sus órdenes is how you would say it in Spanish. We are at your service. And again, Jeff, Skip, this has been just wonderful. My apologies to the 80 people who didn't get in. And we hope they can find us, and we'll send an email out where to look for us on the YouTube channel.
Thank you very much, all.
The chat will also be copied and pasted and put in the comment section of the YouTube channel.
Ciao.
Bye, bye everybody. Happy
I just-
Valentine's Day.
Thank you, everyone, for your support. It's very well appreciated. Thank you very, very much. Bye-bye.
All right.
So long, Dean. We'll have a chat later about how it went. Okay.
Okay. And it's all the hardcores that are still on. So I don't feel in a hurry to end. But eventually, I need to go have lunch, and and take a leak.